Okay, good morning, everybody. Gimel Tammuz today. Probably everybody was at Farbrengens until late last night. I know I was celebrating the third day of Tammuz, which is, arguably the day that the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, or arguably the day that the future redemption actually began, that the Rebbe is actually purifying death, which everything in the world has to be purified and refined because everything is a creation of God. And God wants all of his creations to uh, be recognized as who the author is, who. So we've seen a lot of examples before in the Torah, the most prominent, which is Elijah the prophet, that it seemed that he passed away, but he didn't. He's still here. He comes back regularly. And etc. So a lot of people say, no, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is still the Mashiach, and he has all the qualifications of the Mashiach according to the Maimonides, and nothing basically has changed. Our obligations and the directions of the Rebbe are eternal, and the Rebbe is with us perhaps even more than ever. People are getting amazing answers from Igros Kodesh, and Chabad is growing and growing. There's Chabad houses all over the world, and the children of the emissaries of Chabad, they're opening up Chabad houses, and the new people that have become close to Judaism are also opening up Chabad houses, and the enthusiasm for Mashiach is growing and growing, and we're still in the same exile as we were, 2,000 years ago, but the enthusiasm to change it is certainly greater by Jews. So that's what we're celebrating last night, the third of Tammuz. It was the day that the sun stood still in the heavens. Joshua made the sun stand still. Remember, we learned a couple of weeks ago. It was the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe actually left prison, where he was under a decree of death. They sentenced him to death, and he amazingly got out, right, in communist Russia. And that, according to the Rebbe, is the beginning of the fall of Russia. That's the reason why communist Russia unexplainably just dissolved all of its communism. A revolution that's never been anything even similar to it in the whole history of the world. A revolution that just that dissolved a government and a system of government that cost the lives of tens of millions of people in order to exist and to continue. Communism was probably one of the most destructive and failed systems ever in the world. I guess Nazi Germany didn't do so well, but either. They killed also about as many people. But anyway, a lot of death, and all of a sudden, the whole thing dissolved in one day. Just Gorbachev stood up and said, "That's it, no more." And the Rebbe said that the reason that happened, I mean, it's an unexplainable thing, was because of the previous Rebbe sat in prison and was not affected at all by the fear of which the communist government imposed on all the people. So, okay, so that's what we learned. That's what we did last night. Oh, that's explaining why the class starting a little bit late. Okay, now we're continuing in Likuti Torah. The Rebbe said one of the ways to bring Mashiach is to learn Likuti Torah. So we're learning Likuti Torah. Likuti Torah is a book of speeches which were transformed into essay form, and by the first Rebbe of Chabad. And it's basically talking about exactly what we just finished talking about, Mashiach, and how to prepare ourselves for Mashiach. And the main thing of Mashiach is that he's going to reveal the oneness of God in the world. The world will be filled with the awareness of God like water fills the ocean. And this awareness of God means that everything in the world has to be somehow or other reveal its source, and its source right now, that it's being created every moment by God, everything in the world. And that depends on our internalizing that God is creating us every moment, and He's creating us every moment for a purpose and to manifest that purpose. And that's what the Rebbe is telling us how to do. How to do when we feel that God is creating us and for a purpose, and that we have a reason to be here. So that arouses love, first of all, that we're being created, and secondly, awe that God is creating us, and third, enthusiasm that we have a purpose, and it gives us enthusiasm to do that purpose, which that purpose is to learn the Torah, do the commandments. When Jews learn the Torah and do the commandments, there's a magical effect that occurs in the world that can't be done by any other thing, because the only real pure revelation of God in the world is the Torah and the commandments. So that's what we learned yesterday about, for instance, why we read Parshat Para, why we read about the red cow before Passover. So it's because Passover means going out of all bad, going out of false limitations. So this is the reason we do that, is because going out of Egypt means going out of all of our false limitations in the world, how the world has a negative effect on us and gives us a false identity and scares us and lures us. And Para the Aduma says, therefore, let's just go. That's why we read the Para Aduma before Passover, Kadei, in order lataher, in order to refine ourselves, like we said before, to get rid of our bad thoughts, speech, action, attitudes, and realize that God is the creator of everything. Nothing exists except for God creating it. And then we'll come to love. And says, and therefore we have to try to eliminate our bad attitudes toward the world. And how do we do it? By keeping in mind that it's God's world, it's not our world, and that we're here for a purpose. And the purpose is what God decides, not what we decide. Remember, that's what we learned last few days. Now let's go. This week's Torah portion has a few called Chukat. It has a few very interesting things in it. Miriam passes away. Aaron passes away. Huh? And one thing is very interesting. It's that the Jewish people, they're in the desert, right? And all of a sudden, and they start complaining. They're complaining all the time. And why are they complaining? Because they have good reasons to complain. They're in the desert. They're all alone. They're afraid. And God is trying to teach them to not react to the negative things in the world, to not react. But they're not used to it. It's very difficult for everybody not to react to it. And once in a while, the Jewish people, they said, okay, enough. Once in a while, once every few weeks, but sometimes it really gets out of hand. And so it says that God said, enough, I'm fed up with the Jews already. I'm fed up. I'm sending serpents to bite them and kill them. So he sent these weird serpents, and what it is some sort of snake or something, poisonous snakes, and whoever they bit died. So the people came to Moshe and said, okay, listen, we're sorry, we didn't think it would come to this. Do something. So Moshe he asked God what to do, and God said, put one of these serpents, make whatever it is, a statue or something, and put it up on a pole and hold it up high. And everyone who looks up at this snake or serpent, whatever it is, on the pole will live. And Moses does it, and it works. Even the people that were bitten, and they were supposed to die, they didn't die. And that's it. He cured the whole situation. Moses. So this is a pretty weird story, right? Pretty weird story. What do you mean Moses made a serpent and put it on? You can't make a serpent. Everybody looked at a serpent. First of all, there's a lot of pictures that are forbidden in Judaism, and one of them is a serpent, right? This very common Chinese picture of a big serpent, on with a fire coming out of his mouth, and they have the big marches, the Chinese marches that like 100 people get into a big long tube, and at the top of the tube, that's made of paper mache or something, whatever it is, and at the top of it is this big dragon's head, so it like goes back, wanders, slithers through the crowd. Is well, the fact is a serpent is forbidden. You're not allowed to do this. Here God is telling Moses, make a serpent, and everyone should look up at the serpent, and that's going to save them. So how is that going to save? First of all, they did a sin, the sin that we're complaining all the time, and looking up at a serpent, that's what's going to stop death. Right? They deserved. They were complaining. God got mad at them. He should have told them, okay, let everybody make a vow not to complain anymore. Something, right? Bring fine everybody. Give everybody a big fine. Right? Everybody's going to get fined like $10,000, and what is community service or something. Figure out some way to that'll encourage the Jewish people to change their ways. What's this thing about putting a snake on a pole and everybody looks at the snake on the pole and that cures them? That's what it says in the Torah. Okay, Vayas Moshe, the Moshe made a nachash nechoshet. He said he made a snake from bronze, from copper. Copper. Nechoshet. That's right. Nechoshet is copper. V'yisimeo al nes, and he put it on a pole. V'aya im nachash nashach anachash. If anyone got bitten by one of these serpents that God made, that God sent to kill the Jewish people. Now it says, you look at this copper snake and you live. You live. Every year I forget this. I think it's not translated bronze. Not bronze. Nechoshet is copper, right? That's how they translate it. Okay, you look at the snake and you live. All right. So what is going on over here? Let's have a 1 minute. 1 minute. So the Gemara asks a question. What is going on over here? How could it be that people look up at a snake and that? So it says, no, they didn't look at the snake. They looked in the direction of the snake. They looked at the snake and that made them look above at God. Just let me have a minute over here. 1 second. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Here we go. Yeah, Moses dies. Here it is. Oh. Says right. Excuse me. All right. I don't find the place. There it is. There it is. It says copper. That's right. Copper. I knew it. Okay. A lot of times they translate a bronze snake, which is very common. The translation is wrong. Okay. Isa the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. It says like about this whole thing that the Jewish people were being bitten by these serpents because they sinned against God, and God told Moses make a snake and put it on a pole, and anyone who looked up at the snake will live. Isa the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, the Israel, when the Jewish people they look up, and they attach their hearts to their Father in heaven, then they live. And if not, then they would die. So a Jew that got bit by one of these snakes, as he would look up at this serpent that Moses formed, some sort of a statue of a copper serpent that he put on a pole, and he would live. So the Gemara says it was not the serpent at all that did it. Of course not. Moses put the serpent on a pole so that the Jewish people would look up. And the looking up, that's what saved them. They looked up. Because looking up at the sky, that symbolizes, the sky symbolizes God. So it makes you think about God. You look at the earth, everything is pretty limited. You look at the sky, you can't even imagine where the end of it is. So that makes you start to think, wow, how did the sky get there? And maybe there's a creator to the sky. It makes you feel small. So you look up at the sky, then you think about God. At least you got a chance. You think about God. That's why it says the synagogues are supposed to have windows to them. Synagogues are supposed to have windows so that you look up at the sky, at least you're aware of the sky, you think about God. And the same thing is here also here. They looked up at the sky and they thought about God. And that's not the snake cured them. No, it was looking up at the heavens. That's what cured them, right? And the Gemara says, does that make any sense? Kasha, lama lay lanachash. Why did God say make a snake? Make an arrow, a pointing arrow, like your directions. You point directions, one-way street. Make an arrow, put it pointing up, put it on a pole, and everybody look up at the arrow. What do you have to make a snake for? A snake is a forbidden thing. It's like idolatry. If a snake bit someone, you look up at heaven. What do you have to have the snake for? Because Moses should have said to everybody, you got bit, look up. Look up. Don't look down at the snake. Don't be afraid of the snake. Don't look at where he bit you. Right? Don't think about your family or what you're gonna do. You're gonna die, right? What's gonna happen is start to scream for a doctor. You look up at heaven. Look up at heaven. That's what Moses should have said. Make an arrow pointing to heaven. What do you have to make a snake for? Why a snake and put it on? Oh, and also Maui staklos kalapi mila. What does it mean? You have to look up at God. Hello, Mavur. It's explained as far as prayer goes that when you pray, your eyes are supposed to be looking down. Humility. Your heart is supposed to be up. You look up with your soul, but your eyes are supposed to be down. You're supposed to be humble when you pray. You look down. In Jewish prayer, you don't see people looking up. Maybe with pictures that are drawn, people look. When we say our Father in heaven, we don't mean that he's somewhere up in the cosmos. He's in some sort of in the stratosphere or whatever it is called. But God is not up in the heavens. He's everywhere. It says that your heart should realize that your heart is supposed to be above, not your eyes. Okay. So we have a few questions. Why did Moses have to put a snake on this? And why did he tell everybody to look up? He should have just said, everyone, repent, right? You should hang your heads in shame that you have done such a terrible thing and turn your hearts to the Lord. Oh, that's good. That's pretty good. No, that's not what he said. He put a snake on a pole. He said, everybody look at the snake and you're going to live. This is why, because through the snake, you look at God. And where is God? In heaven. What do you mean? When God is in heaven? You look up, you're going to see God. Your heart has to be to God. Okay, so let's understand this. Naktim lachkor inyan, you read this in the Shama, but why did God put people in this world? Ki ikar tachlito, the whole purpose is ledabek bakono, to cling to our Creator in love and fear. The ikar devekusu, the main clinging to God is in prayer. Shatevot, that the words of prayer, heim yotu krovim, they are closer to the understanding of a person. Was just to go and think about God, like God, so you don't really get that inspired. You talk to God, then you get more inspired, like anything, right? If you're angry at somebody, you start to talk about it, or if you're sad about something and you talk about it, then that arouses your emotions. So the same thing is you should talk to God. But what are you going to say? How long have you got to talk about? What do you have to talk? This is therefore we have, for instance, Psalms of King David. King David was always thinking about God. And King David wrote beautiful poems expressing his connection to God and his desire for God and his look. And the people of the Great Assembly, they also wrote prayers talking about this. So read those prayers, say those things. So you go to pray as you say words. And you say words that arouses a person's understanding and a person's emotions. And certainly before a person dies, before the soul comes into the body, and also after a person passes away, as who mitabek yoter ba'ava, he's got more love and more fear in the inside of his soul. A soul before it comes into the body, souls never die. Right? That's what God made. Souls never die. There are some people, I guess, like big sinners, their souls just get recycled or something. But souls they don't die, not like the body. We've said this before. If Adam wouldn't have eaten from the tree, as people would live forever. So the connection to the body and the soul would be forever. But now it's not that way. The body leaves the soul leaves the body. So the soul is permanent. The body is temporary. This is the soul before it comes into the body, as it's also a creation. It's also a creation, and it also reacts to its surrounding, right? Like creations do. But before the soul comes into the body, the surrounding is totally different. There's no peer pressure. There's no lust and desires. There's no bodily pleasures that you get, right? You eat a big cake or something, you get pleasure from. There's no big cakes up in heaven. You haven't got a body, right? There's no all these pleasure points or pleasure areas, whatever they're called, in your body. There's no, they don't exist. The pleasure of the soul before it comes into the body and after it leaves the body is in God. The problem is if a person got too connected to his body in this world, and then after he dies, he realizes that the whole thing was a big mistake. It was he was fooled, right? His body fooled him, right and left. He thought that making money and having pleasure and being popular, that was important. And suddenly he realizes that it's not important, right? So it's not important. So after a person's soul leaves his body and before the soul comes into the body, as the soul feels God, it feels that it's a creation. It feels the creator, like the angels. And therefore, there it has a tremendous soul before it comes into the body. And after it leaves the body, it has a tremendous appreciation for God. But when the soul comes into the body, that little interim period after a person is born and before he dies, when a soul's in the body, the body does not allow him to serve God. But I don't know, exactly the opposite. Our bodies, because of chomer, because the bodies are so physical, it forces the soul to get pleasure also from the body. Not only does the soul not get pleasure from God, it doesn't even realize that God, but the soul all of a sudden becomes the enemy of God. It is interested only in physical things. Even though the soul does not want to get interested in physical things and be led by the world, especially a Jew. The source of a Jew's soul comes from the essence of God. We're called sons of God. And his desire is to cling to God more. But it's explained in the Zohar, a person that does not transform bitterness to sweetness, he hasn't got any place in the world to come. Huh? So God wants you to have a bitter experience. And that's called bitter experience. It's called being born. People being born and staying in the body is a bitter experience. Why is it bitter? Because it's false. It's false. The whole experience is not necessarily false, but you're you're surrounded and bombarded by all these impulses and feelings and I say experiences that lead you to think that there is no God and lead you to be concerned only with yourself, only to be yourself. One of the best weapons that the world has to make you forget about God is fear. When a person is afraid of something, what usually are people afraid of? They're afraid that something's going to happen to my body, or something's going to happen to me. So because of that, people don't want to say the truth and they don't want to do what's right. And exactly the opposite. It's very easy to do what's wrong, and a lot of people take that path. And when you're in a situation where everybody's taking the easy way, you take the easy way also. And the reason they're taking the easy way is because it's fun a lot of times, or it's just, the least effort. You just do what everybody else is doing. It's the most available. That's why it's called bad. Is in Hebrew, in Kabbalah, whatever is in Judaism, is called klipa. It's a shell. It's like on the outside. You don't go too deeply into what's really going on here in the world. You don't see past the lie and the falseness of this world. But the reason that the world is a big lie and false, because that's what God wants it to be. And he wants us to transform it to the truth. The fact of the matter is this physical world is very, very good, infinitely better than heaven. And it's worthwhile for the soul to be taken out of heaven and put into the world to reveal this good. Either world is terrible. That exactly is what the good is, to transform this terrible into good, to not be affected by the world. Not be affected by the world. Not be affected by peer pressure, not to be affected by your urges. That's the whole essence of what man is. We were only created for this, namely to resist our negative nature and to apply our godly nature. Perhaps we see the best example of this, at least that I can think of, is the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe when he was in prison. So communism, like so many of these other movements, Christianity and all these, they're based on fear, guilt, whatever you want to call it. You're not good, you're bad, all your decisions are wrong, everything you do is a mistake. You have to listen to us. Up to now, you've wrecked everything. The only way you can fix it up is by believing like we do, right? So the communists, they said, the problem with the world is money. And anybody, you have desire for money, you're a bad guy. And we got to get rid of all these bad guys. And if not, if a person doesn't go with what we say, so he's destroying the world, and that person deserves to die. So everybody was afraid. They were all afraid, and everyone was spying, and they were spying on each other. And in the middle of this whole, how do you say, the whirlpool of death and destruction and fear, stood the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said, I'm going to teach Torah. I'm going to supply Judaism to Jews. I'm going to supply kosher meat by giving shochatim and circumcisers to do circumcisions. All these things that were forbidden, the previous Rebbe, he supplied. And finally, he got caught. He got put into jail, and they told him to recant, to do this. He said, I'm not paying any attention to you. And to the degree where even they said, okay, we're letting you go. There was world pressure on Stalin. Stalin wanted to pretend the world to think he was a nice guy. This was in 1927. So he said, okay, I'll let you go. But it was arranged that the Rebbe would leave in such a way that he would have to travel on Shabbat. And he said, I'm not going to travel on Shabbat. I'll leave later. So he defied any threats to his life which would oppose or make it seem that he's weakening his connection to God. Judaism over communism. It was a one-man battle against millions, and he won. So that's the job of a human being. We're supposed to be in this world in order to defy the world and to transform the world. The transformation occurs by God, but we have to do our part to defy our nature and defy the world. Says that's the whole thing of prayer. When we pray, so we remove ourselves from the world a little bit. And that's the we get a proper objective. We can look at the world from God's point of view. That's the point of prayer today. In the first temple, the Jewish people, they didn't pray at all. In the second temple, the men of the great assembly, they established there should be short prayers. But nevertheless, all their service in the time of the first temple, second temple, it was same thing as ours, to transform the bitterness and the darkness of this world to sweetness and light, to show that the world is really a good place, that the world won't be so dominant, and that God, the Creator, will be dominant in the world we're talking about. So why do we have to pray so much now? In the time of the first temple and the second temple, they didn't pray so much, and their job was the same. So it says it's like this: dinim nimtakim b'shorsham, that severe things are fixed up from their source. Kol ra'os v'dinim, all bad or severity, death, shinithavu, which exist in the world, their source comes from makoram, is good. But all the evil that's in the world, the Nazis, the communists, all these false religions, idolatry, right? They're bad. But God creates everything. And God creates bad things also. So God creates Hitler. God creates everything. God doesn't, these things are not outside of God's world. It's not that there's, the communist world and God's world, right? The world of holiness and the world of not holiness. There's only one world. Some things are holy potentially, and some things are holy actually. Some things, the holiness of them is that they have to be eradicated totally. That's their holiness. That's Amalek is here so that we can do a big commandment. We can eradicate him. Says that's what Moshiach is going to do. So it says, therefore God made bad in the world in order that we should transform it. Kamashal zona. It's brought in the Zohar. It's brought also in the Tanya from the Zohar. It brings this very strange example, but it's a very, very, how do you say, poignant example. Once upon a time, there was a king and his son, the prince, he had a son, the prince, and the king had doubts if his son would be fit to rule the kingdom, because the king only thought about the kingdom. That's all. The king only wanted the kingdom's benefit. And the king knew that if something happened to him, and eventually the king was not going to live forever, would his son be a good leader or not? A king has all sorts of temptations, weird temptations, because there's nobody over him. He can do whatever he wants. So the question is, what does my son really want? Where is he really at? Where is he really at? Is he a king? All he thinks about is the kingdom, or maybe he's thinking about having a good time. The world will have an effect on him. So what does the king do? The king hires a prostitute. According to some ways of looking at it, he tells this prostitute to go and find another prostitute. And this second prostitute has to be exactly what his son desires, to waken up all his desires, right? She has to be, with this color hair and this color eyes and this shape and this form and this age and this whatever it is that'll drive his son crazy. Drive his son crazy. So he does it. He gets this prostitute. The goal is to see, will his son act like a normal person and go after this lady, or will he say, "Listen, I'm the king's son. I'm interested in the country. I'm not interested in my own pleasures. Not interested in my own pleasures. I'm interested in the country." Of course, eventually it became that all the kings, especially like those in France, and they became decadent and everything. Okay, but that's not an ideal king. An ideal king is supposed to be one that thinks about his country. So the king gets a prostitute to entice his son, lure his son to act normal. And will his son resist or not? Will his son resist it? Okay, so this prostitute, she's got to do a really good job. She's got to do a good job. She has to really, really, how do you say, lure him, inspire him. She has to drive him crazy. That's her job. So she has to do everything that she can to arouse all of his negative, selfish instincts of the son's. Will the son act normally, or will he act like a king? That's the question. It says it's like the story, like the mashal, like the example brought in the Zohar of the prostitute with the son of the king. Hamavor, which is explained. The Zohar. Here we go. 1 second. In the Zohar, Shekol Ritzona, that all of the desire of this prostitute is Shaloi Litzayet Ota, that the king's son will not listen to her. In other words, she knows that the king's son is being tested. And she knows that if the king's son succeeds in resisting her, that's a sign that we've got a good prince. The country will succeed. We'll have a good leader. He's a true leader. But in order to prove the king's son, she has to really try as much as she can to make him act like an animal, act like a non-king. In other words, she has to try everything she can to make him stumble and fall. But her inner hope is that he'll resist. But she has to try with every fiber of her being, and she has to try to arouse every fiber of his being. Right, so she'll do it in all sorts of tricky ways. And excuse me, sir, can you tell me what time it is? What time it is? Right, so he'll pay a little bit of attention. Oh, I lost my wallet fell on the ground. Could you help me and please pick it up? Right, right. Whatever she does in order to entice him. How do you like my scarf? How do you like my hair? How do you like this? Right, the king's son, if he says, "Oh, let's do a sin. Let's do it." She's failed. But on the other hand, she tries to make the son fail. That's what she has to do, Shalom Arba. She has to try to make the son of the king fail. Weird job she's got. Strange job. She has a job that she has to try to make the son into a traitor. And she has to try with all of her being to make the son of the king a traitor. She has to, but inside she's hoping, I hope that the king's son resists me, but she can't do anything to dissuade him. Shekol Ritzona, all of her desire is that he should not listen to her, and this she'll get more pleasure, and she'll be beloved to the king. The king will say, you did a great job, right? There's no doubt. The king won't say, listen, you didn't put on your lipstick properly, you didn't put on the right perfume, right? I told you not to make those bad jokes about politics. No, she'll do everything right to arouse every fiber of the king's son, not to act like a king's son, not to act like a prince. If she really succeeds in doing that, and she really tempts him, and he resists her, that's the deal. Then she's happy, and the king's son is happy, and the king is happy. On the other hand, if the king's son says, all right, let's go for it, let's do it, then feels terrible. She's demonstrated that the king's son is not fit to be a king's son. The king is disappointed, and the king's son himself will be disappointed. What have I done? How did I do with him like that? But meanwhile, she has to do a really good job of it. That's the same thing as the world. God made a world, And the world does everything it can with every trick, with every, how do you say, the maneuver in order to make us forget who we are. That we're the sons of the king. And to make us get angry, or to make us get resentful, or to make us make, here we have, last week we had Korach made an argument, machlokas, to go against King David, to go against this. All these people were sure of themselves, right? Because the world drove them crazy. The example with the prostitute is a very mundane example. That people, that's called the lower physical pleasures. But people are driven crazy by pleasures which are much more, you want to call it ethereal, power, jealousy. And here we have the people that hated King David, people that hated the first Rebbe of Chabad, right? They had enemies, they were big Talmid Chachamim, they were big Torah scholars, geniuses. Our Rebbe has enemies, but they're not quality enemies. And for some reason, the Lubavitcher Rebbe did not merit to quality enemies. What can we do? But the first Rebbe had terrible enemies. Baal Shem Tov, his enemies were people that were tremendous Talmid Chachamim, right? Why? Because they couldn't resist. Something was different than they couldn't resist. The impulse of selfishness, of their own self. They had to follow themselves. It says, so therefore, that's what God made the world. God made the world. The world is like a big prostitute. And the world makes us angry, makes us depressed, makes us desirous, that brings us into depression and aggression and what is it? Depression and aggression and addictions, right? This is what the rabbis say. Satan upanina l'shem shamayim niskavnu. The forces of evil in the world are really there for the sake of God. Omer, it says, Natan ena b'mikdash rishon. It says that the devil put his eyes on the first temple and destroyed it. This implies nitkanebo, that the devil was jealous of the first temple. Jealous. Because the whole idea of the temple is to take the physical world and elevate it to God, to take animals and elevate them to godliness. The same thing, it encouraged the Jewish people not to act like animals. But it's so natural to do so. The Inyan is like this, that the source of bad and what enlivens it is really good. Kamavur Bazor, like it's explained in the Zohar over there. Ki yesh avda damarid b'mare. Is there a slave that can rebel against its master? God creates everything in the world. Nothing in the world can rebel against God. Can't rebel against God. So the evil that's in the world is not rebelling against God. It's doing what God wants it to do. Hagam, even though sheish kam of adim, even though there are slaves that also mitpartzim me'izananiyah, that they escape from their master. This is called physical slaves. True slaves with Jewish people. They left their master. The Egyptians were our masters. Physical people can do it, yes. Hashem, but creations of God, they receive their life from God. Is a call, and God enlivens everything. How can there be a thing? That can go against God. How can anything in the world go against God? And the Zohar asks this, and the Zohar answers this is like the prostitute with the son of the king. So if so, Hitler is a creation of God. Stalin is a creation of God. Terrible thing to say, but it's true. And God sent them in order to scare the Jewish people, to do, who knows, I don't know why. I mean, you can make up all the ideas you want to. It's not going to convince me, but this is God's business. You can't understand God. But nevertheless, everything is there. So one reason that God created these evil people is that they tried to inspire fear in everyone, and that it didn't work. It didn't work. There were some people that resisted them. Or they tried to inspire depression. Right after the Holocaust, Jews were depressed, they were there, but it didn't work. Came along Chabad and inspired Jews to return to Judaism. Return to Judaism. That's a davar hamachaya. This is a thing which that davar hamachaya is called haros. This is what enlivens all of the evil in the world. The shorsham lamaila hu tov, it's good. But when it comes down in this world, then it becomes really bad. So in the source, everything is good, but where it comes into the world, it's evil. Right? You have to resist it. You have to destroy Amalek. It becomes bad, and it's just severities and bad things, not good. Death. It can be that sometimes what arouses your egotism is spiritual things and sometimes physical things. Okay, so therefore, the Adam. So in other words, what does this mean? Let's get down to it. Let's take the people that, God forbid, they were in the Holocaust, right? So in the Holocaust. So bad things happen to them. What does a person think? What are you supposed to think in those times? What are you supposed to think? You're supposed to think, listen, I don't understand what's going on, but I know somehow or other this is good. Makes no sense. But this is the ultimate bad. People saw their families get killed. People saw their, and they got killed because they were Jews, because they were religious. What's the good? You have to say, listen, I don't know. I don't know what the good is, but I know it has to be good. Everything that God does is good. Somehow this is a new type of good that I have no idea what it is. But one thing for sure, I'm not going to join bad. I'm not going to become a communist. I'm not going to be afraid. I'm not going to be depressed. Like the Rebbe said to these people, the Rebbe began Rebbe in 1950, 51. So he inherited all these Holocaust survivors. So he said to one of them, listen, if you don't put on tefillin, a person said, I can't put on tefillin because of what I saw. I was in the Holocaust. I'm finished with God. And the Rebbe said, if you don't put on tefillin because of what they said in the Holocaust, you're giving a prize to Hitler. That's exactly what Hitler would want. That you would stop being Jewish. You would run away from your Judaism. That would make him very happy. You want to do the people thought, one second, really, who am I benefiting by this? That I'm not doing Torah, the commandments, right? The Holocaust was terrible. And God made the Holocaust, no doubt about it. But that doesn't mean that God is bad. Something's going on over here that I don't understand what it is. And I'm a Jew, I'm going to do Torah and the commandments. And that's what it means. Therefore, when it happens bad to a person, one second. Where is this one? Oh. Therefore, when it comes to a person, is a Yesorium, some sort of difficulties in life, tortures in life. Yachshov, you should think, don't judge things according to what they seem. Sharahu, that it's just bad. Ela be'emet, really, shorshu tov, the source of everything is good. Because in front of God does not come any bad. It's a sentence in Job. Only good. Rak, but why does it seem to us to be so bad? Why is the Holocaust so bad? Right? Because Shu Eno Musa, we don't understand it. It can't come down to the world. And the good part of it remains above, and all we see is the external. So it's the same thing with the king's son, right? The king's son, he's tempted by this lady, and the lady is very tempting to him, but there's always a little voice inside of him saying, listen, you're the prince. You can't act like an animal. You can't act like a normal person. There's a little voice inside of him, but everything else is saying, all of his eyes and his nose and his mouth and her perfume and the way she speaks and everything, he's going, his whole body's going crazy as soon as he pays attention to his body, his urges. But as long as he doesn't pay attention, he says, listen, the reason this is happening to me, this is something good. Maybe it's a test. I don't know what it is. But the fact of the matter is I must strengthen my connection to my true identity. I am a prince. So really everything comes good. And that's the same thing. Really, he realizes that the prostitute was really sent by his father. It was sent by his father to test him, to see if... Okay, I mean, listen, this is very nice. You know, the Rebbe is definitely not trying to justify bad things that happened to the Jewish people. Moses, when God when God made the Jewish people suffer. So he said, God, why are you making, why are you doing bad to the Jewish people? He didn't say, it's up to you, God, whatever you do is good. We pray every day, 18 prayers, 19 prayers, that the bad things in the world should cease, that the sick people should get cured, etc. That's what it means. It's called Michla Dakik. This is the small little voice. This is the small, like the channel that attaches us to the truth. We have to say to ourselves, it's all from God. That this is the little, channel of life, which is keeping everything in the world alive. And this is what we have to think about. And now we're gonna see. We're gonna get back tomorrow. That's why Moses put the snake on a pole to show that the snake really, its source is really good. The source of bad is really good, and that's what stopped the bad from being bad, as we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. We'll bring the story about Nachum Ishkamzu. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Okay, here we go. Stop the rewind.